Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you as always on the show today. We have pretty full coverage of all things going on in the Middle East at the moment. A lot of stuff going on. We're going to go through some of the New York Times coverage and I'll break down some of that. You know how I felt about New York Times coverage of the Middle East so far. But big questions are, is Israel going to invade Lebanon? That is really the big question that we're going to be working through today, giving you some of the live updates and what Israel's strategy has been and, why they have been coming at Lebanon so hard, harder than they came at Gaza in the opening days after October 7th, which would really put it into perspective as towards what's going on, at the moment. So, also, we'll have a full update for you on the presidential race. Essentially, Trump and Harris both back in the spotlight. Harris today in Pennsylvania talking about new deal for the middle class. Just seems to be, normal, boring political stuff. But we'll tell you what she and Donald Trump are up to. And also a pretty interesting piece to end it out I want to get to from Nate Silver talking about why exactly, this is very interesting in terms of the fabric of our country and the realignment in our politics, why exactly the Republicans' edge in the Electoral College may be fading, which could be good news, which means, if the Democrats ever pull a Trump 2016, that's probably almost certainly going to be the end of the Electoral College, which would be a very good thing. Yeah, so we are very, very excited for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and really do appreciate it. But we do have to start with some general updates on what exactly has been going on today. Things kind of started off, essentially, I think this happened before, around early morning, around 6:30 or so a.m. local time. Hezbollah shoots rockets going their furthest yet, reaching very deep in central Israel. They have these capabilities, and they have pretty much every non-super pro-Israel military analyst, and even some of the very pro-Israel military analysts say Hezbollah, they may not be and they're not as strong as the IDF, but they definitely have a lot more where that came from. They shoot some of their farthest rockets out yet. It was I think it was like a Iranian-made Qatar rocket or something, is what it's called. So it goes Tel Aviv, which is around the center of the country, particularly targeting the Mossad base, which is essentially the CIA of, or the FBI, whatever, of Israel, and that obviously is shot down. It would be a much bigger deal if it actually hit the target, but this then prompts retaliatory Israeli strikes, obviously. And then we hear a very interesting speech from Herzi Halevi, who is the army's top commander in Israel, saying your entry will show Hezbollah what it's like to meet a professional combat force, as he touts a, quote, possible ground invasion of southern Lebanon. As we've seen kind of continuing moves that something that all of the world that has pretty faithfully spoken up against, pretty much all Europe, all of, the UN, the United States even, has come and said, we cannot have a war in Lebanon. And there is one force pushing that at the moment. Are people condemning that force that's pushing for regional war in the Middle East at the moment? No, they're not. But they are, and it's been pretty universal in terms of the condemnations, in terms of, especially the UN going on right now in New York, saying that we do not want a war in Lebanon. Israel's called up 2 additional reserve brigades. The truth is they would probably need a lot more than just 2 if they wanted a full invasion. It's continuing a massive bombing campaign, displacing 90,000 and killing hundreds of people. Foreign ministers of Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan have condemned Israel's aggression against Lebanon, warning it's pushing the region towards all-out war. Really kind of hard to know exactly what their plans are, but a lot of people seem to be, and here you can see the U.S. doing exactly what Israel's wanted, and really the Frankenstein is controlling the doctor at this point, because it is not in the U.S.'s best interest. It's not in the region's best interests, but it's in Israel's best interests for them to essentially carve out, and it's been one of their biggest priorities for a long time, is carve out a separate deal with Hezbollah and get them to stop, because Hezbollah has forced their entire northern front to essentially empty out the entire northern border, all those towns up the northern border between Lebanon and Israel. Hezbollah bombing there occasionally since the last year has forced all those towns to empty out. It's becoming a bigger and bigger political weight on the government there. The fact that a fourth of their country or sixth of their country or whatever in the north is completely empty. No one's living there. No one's doing anything there, and they gotta, they've been putting these people up in hotels for the last, however many months. So it has been a big thing on them. So they would love nothing better, essentially, to carve off Lebanon and carve off Hezbollah, and then continue their focus on Gaza, which is exactly why Hezbollah's doing what they're doing, because they don't want. They want to continue to drain resources from the Israeli state and stop them from doing whatever they want in Gaza. And they see the fact that they're stopping Israel from achieving their top aims as a big, big win. And I think that makes it all the more apparent today when we see this come through, that the U.S. is working toward brokering a short-term ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel. So how about that? They're essentially, not playing any role in forcing broader peace in the region. They're not trying to help the region as a whole. They're trying to help Israel by doing a short-term ceasefire with Hezbollah, essentially getting in the middle and saying, hey, you guys, break it up. Hezbollah, lay off Israel. Israel, lay off Hezbollah. And then Israel will turn around, do what it needs to do, so to speak, in Gaza. And then, oh, wait, it's only a temporary ceasefire, so they can get back to doing exactly what they were doing before. And you can really see it there quite clearly. It's exactly what they did with the port. It's exactly what Biden has done every step of the way, which is giving the kind of U.S. diplomatic veneer of respectability on all of Israel's priorities, so they can come out, advocate for those priorities, and say, oh, look, the U.S. says them, when everyone knows, essentially, that the U.S. is not serious in any way about bringing peace. So the new diplomatic push by the United States came amid more signs on Wednesday that the conflict is heating up. Hezbollah fired a missile at Tel Aviv for the first time, a reminder that it still has the ability to reach deep into Israel's urban core despite losing many of its top leaders. At the same time, Israel's military chief, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, again told soldiers stationed in the northern border of Lebanon that airstrikes Israel had launched since Monday were intended to prepare the terrain for a possible ground incursion. So, I think it's going to be very interesting. A lot of military experts are going to be watching how many battalions are they sending to the northern border. They're pulling some out of the Gaza. Will they send them to the northern border, or will they send them back to the kind of crumbling economy? That is a big thing that many people are going to be watching in terms of prospects of a broader war over the coming weeks. And especially given the fact that the American election is definitely something to be considered. There's a lot of different stuff going on right now. But Israel continued its barrage of attacks on Wednesday, with the military saying it had struck 280 sites in Lebanon by mid-afternoon. At least 51 people were killed and 223 people wounded in airstrikes since Wednesday morning, the Lebanese health minister said. Hezbollah fired dozens of rockets at northern Israel, although Israel's missile defense systems intercepted many of them. One rocket struck a home in Kibbutz Sa'ar, outside the city of Nahariya, spraying shrapnel that injured two men, one of them seriously, rescue workers said. So, yeah, there's been fires, and, the reason also, and this is going to sound like, I'm defending Hezbollah, it's almost going to sound too, biased, for Hezbollah, but a big reason, and by the way, if you don't believe me, look this stuff up. Look at where they're targeting these bases, and they're targeting these strikes. Please go fact check me and write to me at swrn702@gmail.com if I'm wrong. But they are, and if you can find something reliable that proves that I'm wrong, but they are specifically, the reason why they're not hitting as many casualties is because they are also, partially it's a big part of the Iron Dome, but a big part of it is literally the fact that they have been targeting primarily military targets, military bases. So, of course, bottom line on this is it seems like, and the what we've been hearing out of kind of U.S. media about Israel seeking to escalate, to de-escalate, or whatever the hell that Orwellian phrase was, is definitely something that they would do. It makes sense for something that they would do, and that's what these strikes were. But I think they kind of know, if you went up to the top Israeli generals, you ask them, you think this is going to get Hezbollah to back down? The answer is probably no. Do they intend a broader war? It's obviously too soon to say for certain. Hopefully, everyone in the region is able to avoid a regional war, because that would just be an absolute bloodbath and a catastrophe for humanity in general. But it does seem like on that front we are very much in wait-and-see mode due to Israel's continued belligerence, and both in the northern front, obviously, and what started this all, which is in Gaza. Now, we are going to continue, but before we do, I do want to let you all know, obviously, about the chance to join the Supporters Club. And the Supporters Club is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for you to essentially join and support Newsflash, support me. If you really like the show, definitely something you should do. Get ad-free versions of every episode. We also have some bonus episodes, some campaign chats, some analysis, maybe some interviews, all of that coming if and when you join the Supporters Club. We were talking about Israel's strategy and essentially what they are trying to do and how it relates to Lebanon and Gaza, and essentially trying to drive a wedge and take Lebanon out of the fight, take Hezbollah out of the fight for Gaza, and essentially separate them and try and get Lebanon off Israel's back and Hezbollah off Israel's back, so they can then go to focus more on Gaza. So in a need to divert public discourse from fleeing, this is, by the way, a very good piece that I do want to go to kind of more on that in the Middle East Eye by Marin Rappaport in Tel Aviv. He writes, in a need to divert public discourse from freeing Israeli captives in the open-end war on Gaza, a war in Lebanon was the ideal move for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The escalation, which began with the explosion of pagers and radio devices across Lebanon last week, has in this regard been a success so far. The issue of the captives has been removed from the public agenda in Israel, although it's unclear how this escalation will contribute to their return or that of the North residents back to their homes. Additionally, the military's heavy bombardment of Lebanon has brought Netanyahu closer to the army. Israeli defense philosophy has been based on deterrence for decades. That was the philosophy behind Israel's policy for Hamas over the past 15 years, to hit Palestinian movement hard every time it breaks the status quo as determined by Israel. But this deterrence was severely undermined by the Hamas-led attack on Israel on 7th of October, which saw Israel defenses fall flat to Palestinian fighters within 3 hours. Now in Lebanon, this discourse is back. Striking there is a means for Israel to regain its deterrence, and this Netanyahu and the army are united. The recent success of the Israeli military in Lebanon, the pagers blast, the killing of many Hezbollah high commanders, and the heavy bombing across southern and eastern Lebanon are attributed to Netanyahu. Therefore, the premier's image of a forward-looking leader who does not give in to pressure, neither from the army nor from the Americans, has been strengthened. And I've said, just as Biden needs to have that, okay, I need to actually pretend that I'm caring about the Palestinians here kind of posture for his political situations, Benjamin Netanyahu needs to have the, oh yeah, I'm actually going to give the Americans the middle finger, and I'm stronger than them. I don't fully depend on them. I'm just Bibi. I as Bibi can do whatever I want. That kind of mindset is also very important for him politically as well. The attacks on Lebanon enjoy broad-based support in Israel, not only among Netanyahu's supporters, but also in the military establishment and center-left opposition. Yet it seems that a ground invasion of southern Lebanon to push Hezbollah's elite Radwan force behind the Litany River may not fit Israel's intentions at the moment, which is very interesting. What Netanyahu and the army now want is to pressure Hezbollah to accept its ceasefire in Lebanon. And this is why, as we see, the U.S. comes through with this proposition, a temporary ceasefire. Which I don't, we've all seen how the U.S. proposing ceasefires that Israel supposedly is down to accept went in the past. It did not go very well at all. They did not accept the ceasefire, even though Hamas essentially accepted it. I doubt Hezbollah will accept this because it's only, a temporary ceasefire, and that is not something that they are ever really going to go with, even if Israel would love to have a temporary ceasefire. But it is clear that Israel and the U.S. will be working hand in hand to, again, get Lebanon off of the backs of Israel, get Hezbollah off the backs of Israel, so they can then focus on Gaza. Again, they want to pressure, again, a ceasefire in Lebanon, renounce the support for the Palestinians in Gaza without having to send ground forces in Lebanon, to turn Lebanon, not occupy it, as it did with Gaza in the 15 years before the 7th of October. Since the ground invasion in October, Palestinian fighters had killed nearly 350 Israeli soldiers and wounded thousands, according to the Israeli military. Taking territory inside Lebanon could attract a much higher price in soldiers, as the geography there is much more complicated than in Gaza, and Hezbollah is much better equipped than Hamas, and also not under siege, much better access to resources, a whole bunch of other things. Invading Lebanon would probably drag Israel into a long war, and a long war contradicts the very idea of deterrence, according to which aerial bombing can replace ground operations. So, what they're really going to be relying here on is the U.S., and can the U.S. help Israel, because they're kind of caught in this contradiction where they need to have deterrence, but they can't really deter. They don't have the power to really knock the socks off of Hezbollah. They'll probably beat them over a very long, costly period of time, but they don't have the power to really knock the socks out of them, and it's a much riskier situation because they can't just go and deter and scare Hezbollah back into place. So they need the U.S. to essentially get Hezbollah to come in and agree to a ceasefire, before anything even happens, so they don't have to put ground troops in southern Lebanon, which is going to be very interesting to see if the U.S. can pull off. And I'll say right now, for the Biden administration, their track record is not necessarily setting them up for success. Countries like Iran, Syria, and Iraq, and maybe other Arab countries, may feel a need to react if Israel invades an Arab sovereign state. Therefore, at least for now, a full ground invasion in southern Lebanon is not something Netanyahu or the army are interested in. Israel is currently experiencing which I think, by the way, is a very, very good point by Rappaport in this article, the fact that the deterrence goal that Israel wants here is not something they're going to be able to get if they pull out this ground invasion. So it'd be much more advantageous for the U.S. to come in, swoop in, and get them to agree to a preemptive, temporary ceasefire, which would be very against Hezbollah's interests. But the overwhelming show of force and the strikes, which again are worse than they were on Gaza, in the first few days of Gaza, that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to strike fear into the hearts of Hezbollah people, saying, "Oh, we better just get Israel off our backs for now. We better just agree to a ceasefire," and that's exactly what Israel wants. But will Hezbollah agree to it? It remains to be seen, to say the least. So, Iran's diplomatic offensive, which was expressed in the meeting of a new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, with Jews and Israeli academic in New York, and his measured speech at the UN General Assembly, are seen in Israel as proof that its deterrence is working on Tehran, which is interesting because, I think that's maybe a little bit of wishful thinking there, and not really too much evidence, I guess, behind that. So, nonetheless, an Israeli ground invasion is still possible. Public presence may begin to form in this direction. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are affected by Hezbollah's missiles, adding to the 60,000 residents of the north who were already evacuated from their homes since 8th of October due to the cross-border exchanges of fire. The real goal of Israel behind this recent escalation is to pressure Hezbollah directly by military force or indirectly through intermediaries, aka USA, to reach a ceasefire. By achieving this, Israel seeks to divide Hezbollah from its ally Hamas. In this sense, it's pushing the Radwan force beyond the Litani River, and the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 are secondary for Netanyahu. He needs a ceasefire in the north, again, to have a free hand in the Gaza Strip. Yet the bottom line is, by this escalation, Netanyahu wishes to bring Israel back to the place it was on the 6th of October. As before the 7th of October, Netanyahu is ready to accept that Hamas will continue to rule Gaza, though weakened after the Israeli invasion and without any international legitimacy. As long as this is the case, Israel will not be pushed to negotiate any political agreement with Palestinians, and blocking such negotiations, let alone any peace deal with Palestinians, has always been Netanyahu's goal. And I think the big question Rappaport ends off of is yeah, sure, they can try and push a ceasefire deal, and the U.S. being there certainly is a wild card, which I think was, announced before he wrote the piece. But essentially, I think it will be very interesting. We're going to have to see what happens if they start doing all these attacks, if they go for an overwhelming show of force, and then we see like what happened today. We're seeing rockets in Tel Aviv, and the people in the north of Israel who are displaced from their homes being like, hey, this strategy is not working. Let's just make peace with them so I can go back to my home. That could be another very possibility, I guess you could say. If Hezbollah increases the range of its missiles, many more Israelis will be forced to leave their homes, as happened during the Second Lebanon War in 2006. Then there's the already bad economic situation, which is deteriorating in Israel. Some reports say that if the international rating agencies will further lower Israel's credit, if the war goes on and on, it will lead to potential threats of mass economic collapse. The Treasury Ministry announced that growth figures are even worse than expected. International airlines are now canceling flights to Israel one after the other. If the war intensifies in Lebanon, there's zero chance they will resume. The sense of siege already is very much present in Israel, and there's another issue. Netanyahu wants to reach the U.S. elections in November without an agreement in Gaza. The current escalation seems to guarantee him this. But if the conflict of Lebanon deteriorates into a regional war, which Israel prefers to avoid at the moment, American interests may be at risk. In this scenario, the Biden administration, despite its reluctance to confront Israel, may be pushed to pressure Israel to stop the war, at least in Lebanon, but maybe in Lebanon and Gaza. This will be a result Netanyahu will want to avoid. So, bottom line, from a very, very interesting piece in the Middle Eastern Eye by a good gentleman named Marin Rappaport, a great Israeli analyst from Tel Aviv, is that the Israelis are essentially hoping to not essentially invade because they don't have the capability to really, again, knock the socks off of Hezbollah, so to speak, but they are hoping to, with the U.S.'s help, to tie Hezbollah's hands, to get them off their backs, to give Netanyahu a free hand in Gaza. But it seems like Hezbollah is in no position to agree to a permanent ceasefire, or even a temporary ceasefire for that matter, to allow Israel to slaughter Gazans and wantonly in the way that it so clearly desires. So easier said than done on that front. But of course, we'll keep a close eye on the region. Now to the election. We have, 43, 44, 42 days to the election, when we have a lot of new updates, essentially. Here's the latest from the New York Times. Vice President Kamala Harris promised a new way forward for the middle class in a closely watched speech on economic policy in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, and assailed former President Donald J. Trump as a friend of billionaires, not working Americans. For Donald Trump, our economy works best if it works for those who own the big skyscrapers, not those who actually build them, she said as her campaign handed out a roughly 80-page policy paper that included chapters on cutting taxes for working people and investing in small businesses. We shouldn't be constrained by ideology and instead should seek practical solutions to problems. Harris told the Economic Club of Pittsburgh, highlighting her proposal to lower taxes on 100 million Americans and offer tax credit to companies that increase good union jobs. As she said, her remarks seemed aimed at moderate swing voters, evoking a quotation from the billionaire Warren Buffett and promising easier access to capital for startups with a dig at Trump's inherited wealth and multiple bankruptcies, as she, I would say, very, very successfully kind of got under his skin about that as a debate, which I thought was a great move, as it, is probably one of the most unappealing things about Trump to Americans. It's a reminder that he got so much wealth from his dad, and of course his reaction on that too. And there is a lot of ground, I think, to hit Trump on with this, but of course, is she going to be credible? The question is she going to be credible as somebody who is actually going to fight for these good union jobs, fight for things like that on the other side? Trump has been incredibly pro-billionaire, probably his most pro-billionaire reliant run yet. So I think that is very, very clear. And I think it's very interesting, and probably why he is so weak at the moment in a lot of ways, and not seeming to have that kind of the mojo that we saw from him in 2016 and even 2020. Her speech followed an appearance by Trump in North Carolina, during which he complained about the pace of the FBI's investigation into 2 assassination attempts against him, said they might have been tied to Iran, even though his officials have said there is no evidence to suggest it. I mean, I don't think they're, assassinating American presidents when they just got one of their own killed very recently. I don't know if they're at that stage, to be quite honest. Following his remarks, which came a day after his campaign said he had been briefed on specific threats from Iran, Trump's campaign said he would return to Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of the rally shooting on October 5th for what is sure to be a big moment there. So all in all, Trump seems to be, again, much more self-focused and, again, much more reliant on that billionaire money, which is taking that kind of populist, out-of-touch edge out of his campaign, and continues, to really be advised by the most online, out-of-touch people I would say that he's ever been advised by, and people that are just not really giving him the straight scoop on a lot of his lines, and it's really showing in a lot of his different media appearances and his rally appearances on what works and what doesn't work. And Kamala Harris is really running the kind of standard centrist, Democrat campaign, paying a little bit more homage in the post-Joe Biden administration world to good union jobs, but not really doing anything to excite on the economy and really convince Americans that she is going to be the change candidate that she advertises, really doing a bit of a job to shed that image as time goes on. This is pretty significant here. Republicans, according to Nate Silver, wrong Nate there. Nate Cohn, actually, of the New York Times, who's their personal Nate Silver, nerdy Nate. Ever since Trump's stunning victory, he writes, in 2016, when he lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, but still triumphed with over 300 electoral votes, many who follow politics believe Republicans held an intractable advantage in the Electoral College. But there's growing evidence to support a surprising possibility. His once formidable advantage in the Electoral College is not as ironclad as many presumed. Instead, it might be shrinking. Because based off of really the way the polls are and the general New York Times kind of polling averages here, it seems like she doesn't, meaning Kamala, does not need to win the Electoral College for her to prevail in the race. The simplest way to measure the advantage in the Electoral College is to take the difference between the national popular vote and the vote in the tipping point state, which is the state that would put one candidate over the top in the Electoral College. Right now, Vice President Harris leads the polling in the national vote by 2.6 percentage points and leads Wisconsin, the current tipping point state, by 1.8 points. It's just based off of the polling average. So that makes Trump's advantage less than a point. By this measure, Trump's advantage is only about 1/5 as large as it was 4 years ago when President Biden fared 3.8 points better nationally than in Wisconsin, the tipping point state, in 2020. So essentially, how big was the margin there is why they're using this kind of method, is how big was the margin in the state that the winning candidate needed to win by the Electoral College method versus the national vote if it had just been no Electoral College system. So the reason why this is possible is, on the one hand, Harris is holding her own in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. It's worth noting this is tenuous. Together, these states help Harris win the Electoral College with little room for error. Should the polls meaningfully underestimate Trump in any one of Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, as they did in his last 2 presidential elections, much of his Electoral College advantage could return. The second half of the explanation, oddly, is that Trump is gaining in non-competitive states like New York, which is improving his position in the national popular vote without helping him in the most important states. So making those margins in blue states a little smaller is actually helping kind of weaken the Electoral College advantage, because he's getting those Electoral College, or those raw popular votes, which is making an eventual possible Electoral College win by Trump more justifiable in terms of that criteria. And again, that the only reason this is really now is on the other side is that we have Kamala Harris doing better in those states that would essentially get her over the line pretty easily, and that is playing into the national polling average. And I think he really, Cohn here brings up a pretty important point. It's not the rural states, small rural states being favored more in the electoral college system that necessarily makes it help for people like Trump or just Republicans in the Trump era. Instead, the most distorting feature is that it's almost entirely winner take all. You get all of the electoral votes from a state if you win it by a single vote. Conversely, you get 0 additional electoral votes if you win the state by a lopsided margin. In 2016, Trump narrowly prevailed in Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, winning all 75 electoral college votes from those states, despite winning them by a combined average of less than 1 percentage point. So that gives him a lot for a relatively little margin of victory, and there's a lot of people whose support was registered in those states for Hillary Clinton that were not counted just because of the way the electoral college system worked. And Hillary Clinton fared well in non-competitive blue states, California, Texas, Texas as well. Was not where you would think, but she really gained relative to Barack Obama. But it didn't help her because she lost. Trump's declining electoral college gap today thus reflects some combination of his relative weakness in the core battlegrounds and relative strength in non-competitive states. So it's all relative, but I think the real bottom line here is, I think we can hopefully all agree on this, is that it shows how really stupid and undemocratic this system is and how there's so many different ways it could distort people's voices and essentially make a lot of people's votes just not matter on the presidential level in the slightest. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you really did, please consider again joining that supporters club. Link for that is in the description. You could add free shows, and we will see you on Friday.